Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That's just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Oh, baby. It's Thursday, but it feels like Monday in many ways. I'll tell you why here in just a second. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the program. It is the Michael Dukes Show, broadcasting live across the state of Alaska, the great state of Alaska, on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator, and live around the world on the interwebs at michaeldukeshow.com. We appreciate you guys being part of it today. We've got a full show for you today. First of all, in hour two, Will Stapp, representative, is going to be coming back on, giving us an update on the defined benefits, the defined benefits plan and more. And we'll talk with him about some other stuff as well. Looking forward to that. A little bit of a recap after our conversation about 2.5 weeks ago, where he had some hard truths, and I liked it. I liked it a lot. We're going to talk about that in hour two. But in hour one, first of all, this is a little bit, not only was I technically challenged this morning and had a lot of, it was like right up to the last minute. I just got everything done right before the show. That felt a little bit like a Monday. But Mondays is normally when we have one of our favorite guests on, Sarah Montalbano. That name is just fun to say. Sarah Montalbano joins us usually on Mondays. And in fact, so much so on Mondays that she actually named her Substack after the Montalbano Monday moniker. But today is Thursday, and I actually started off the email with, hey, I know it's not Monday, but do you want to come and hang out on Thursday? And she said, sure, because that's the kind of gal she is. Sarah Montalbano joins us this morning to talk about, the Ambler Road, miniature minerals, the myth of green jobs, and so much more. And she's with us right now. Hello, young lady. How are you this morning?
I'm doing well. It feels like a Monday now. I'm feeling good.
Feel a little bit like a Monday. You might want to pull your camera just down a little bit because we're hiding your chin with the Chiron there. So there we go. Anyway, she's if you haven't been following her, you should, and you should go out to her Substack, which I'm posting up on the website right now, sarahmontalbano.substack.com, where she writes about energy policy. We first met her and she was writing about education because she's an all-around Renaissance gal. She does a little bit of everything in there. Born and raised in Alaska, and now she's out in Minnesota working for the American Experiment. Is that right? Did I do that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, and she's got a lot of good stuff for us. So Sarah, we can feel free to free range at any point this morning. But what really got my attention was, one, you were recently writing about the Ambler Road, and you've got some experience with this and some background on this. So we're going to talk about that. I do want to talk about some mini minerals, which I found fascinating because I'd never considered. People don't know what mini minerals are. We're going to give them an education this morning. But let's start with Ambler Road. Tell us a little bit about the latest update and what's going on and what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been an exciting month for Alaska, quite frankly. On October 6th, the Ambler Road was approved, essentially. President Trump granted the appeal made by the Alaska Industrial Development and Export Authority, which had appealed back when, oh gosh, this project has been flip-flopping between administrations for a very long time, and I've been covering it for most of that time. 211-mile private road. It would unlock access to the Ambler Mining District. There's more than 1,700 mining claims in that area, so I'd be very curious to see what could get built if there was just a little better access to the area. So it's been very exciting. And just recently, a little bit ago, there was a kind of group of 4 actions by the Department of Interior. One of them was about drilling in the coastal plain area of Anwar, and the other was issuing all these permits. So not only has the appeal been granted, but the permits to go ahead and work on Ambler have been processed by the Bureau of Land Management, by the Army Corps of Engineers. They should have pretty much everything they need to go. Probably, I'm sure there's tons more permits that I'm missing, but those are the big ones from the federal level.
Right. And
Yeah.
this has been this has been a contentious bone. There's a lot of folks out there who are
Mhm.
talking about, well, some of it's not about necessarily about conservation. It's more about
Mhm.
preservation, preserving it as kind of capturing it in amber, so to speak,
Mhm.
instead of conserving it and being as careful as possible and protecting the environment. It's about locking everything just as it is. We don't want development. We don't want this. We don't want that. But
Yeah.
again, with so many potential mine claims and everything else, and of course, some of those mines are potentially critical minerals. We've got some rare earths. We got some all different kinds of things out there.
Mhm.
This is a big deal. There has been some pushback, though, environmentally and everything else. Tell me what your thoughts are as you see some of the arguments there. What are you thinking about?
Yeah, I would say the first is that these projects are never going to see unanimous approval across the board. I think there's a lot of communities close to the project that are actually really supportive of it. But there's I think a problem with Alaska, in that Alaska becomes the poster child for the national nonprofit environmentalist preservationist. I'm glad you say it that way, because they really are preservationists, not conservationists. And they want to use the Ambler Road and Anwar and all of these issues as a big fundraising push. They see it, I think, really as an opportunity to impose their will a little bit on the state. And the fact of the matter is that Alaska is a resource state. We have oil and gas and mining, and we need to be able to do these things. And we know how to do them safely and responsibly here. And I think that's the big difference in the ethos, that we know how to do it while minimizing our environmental impacts.
Right.
And that's, I think, what the administration's getting at here, is that we can do it safely. And first of all, we need to be able to get through the permitting process. At a certain point, there has to be a yes or no answer, and I can't go through endless appeals between administrations. That's not sustainable, and it creates a large money sink, I think, for the state when it has to get invested in all of these things. And it's not a certain place for developers to be either.
Right. Well, and we've seen this before in
Mhm.
across the globe when it comes to environmentalist activism, that they've
Mhm.
utilized this permitting process as a bit of a warfare issue, where they stretch it out and they string it out and they cause it
Mhm.
continual delays. And then the bureaucrats, especially if bureaucrats are kind of the same mindset or in that political camp, they're
Mhm.
doing the same thing and they're stretching it out and they're expanding the cost. They're just accelerating the costs over and over and over again. And that's problematic, especially when we're talking, I mentioned it once, but critical minerals,
Oh,
heavy
yes.
metals, those kind of things, rare earths. I mean, those are things that we need. And I guarantee you that China and India and some of these other countries are not going through the same rigorous process that we are. And so if you really, in my mind, if you really cared about the environment, not
Mhm.
just the environment in your own backyard, but the environment as a whole, you would be encouraging development in areas where that it's being done correctly, that it's being done in a safe, responsible manner, instead of just letting them, doing whatever they're doing over there, which we know a lot of times is just stripping it out and opening it up and and everything else. Hopefully we're getting closer to this than anything else. And of course, this helps us as Alaskans, because now we can develop our own resource, and it gives us yet another, it bolsters that other leg of the three-legged stool of government and tourism and resources. And that's pretty much the three big legs here in the state. It helps bolster that up.
Yeah, absolutely. That's precisely my thinking on it. I would ask any environmentalist in the traditional national nonprofit camp, the preservationists, if they're willing to really forego the benefits of modern mining, because I think they would say no. And frankly, they're getting these things from overseas, but because it's so out of sight, out of mind, they really aren't concerned about it. And lawfare is a really, really difficult challenge for these kind of projects. There's a lot of reforms proposed at the federal level every so often to kind of remedy that. But a huge part of it is that the environmental groups get paid for their costs of bringing these kind of public interest lawsuits. They
Right.
are able to be reimbursed for it. And so it creates an industry. And I think that's a pretty obvious malincentive here that we have.
Yeah. Well, I remember
Mhm.
that there was an instance, and I hate to hold up France as an example, but I know that at one point France had a thing, this is probably 25 or 30 years ago, where they essentially said you can only challenge things in court up to a certain point. And then
Mhm.
once it's past this go, no go threshold, you're done.
Mhm.
And that's how they ended up with some of the nuclear plants and some of the other things that they had, because they had reached it to the point where that they're like, this is just ridiculous. You can't just continue to sue up to the point of where they're actually breaking ground or they've broken ground, and
Yeah.
now you put them on hold for months and months and maybe years. And maybe that's something we need to look at again,
Mhm.
because it is a preservationist mindset. It's like, we know we're going to hurt you, and then, as you said, it's become an industry, and then they utilize these charges as ways. I'm sure that there's an email that says, protect Ambler Road, donate money today, right?
Yep.
I'm sure that
I'm
there's an
sure.
email from some environmentalist group that says, protect the beautiful tundra and the caribou and the baby seals and the
Mhm.
whales, and stop the Ambler Road today. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm sure they're using it as a fundraising mechanism.
I'm certain of it, and obviously, I back in 2023, I had written about this project for the Wall Street Journal, and I made the point then because it was in the Biden administration. I said, "Look, if you want the zinc, the lead, silver, cobalt, and copper, all of those minerals that are in the Ambler Mining District." You're going to need these things for wind turbines and solar panels and battery storage. Why do we not want to get them here in the United States? We're just offshoring the environmental impacts. And I don't think that the traditional preservationists think about it at all that way. And I think there's a lot of miseducation about how modern and responsible domestic mining is, and really just how China and other countries are not doing things right. It's
Right.
it's really upsetting to me because yeah, it's a fundraising push at the end of the day. Um, absolutely.
Yeah, no, and I think
Mhm.
it's fascinating to watch this discussion. And for once you understand that it's a preservationist mindset and not a
Mhm.
conservationist mindset,
Yes.
because conservationists, they want to do the right thing so that it's available to many generations in the future, right? So that you can
Yeah.
conserve it and hopefully steward it and make it better so that multiple. Whereas the preservationists, like I said, they just want to lock it in the way that it is. And
Mhm.
once you understand that, it really changes your paradigm as you look at some of these things and the way that they fundraise and the way that they talk about this stuff out there on the internet and everything else. Um, I want to continue this, but we got to move on. I want to get into mini minerals, which is a
Yeah.
fascinating discussion, and I also want to talk about some of the other stuff that you're writing about. Sarah Montalbano is our guest here this morning. Our fun, one of our favorite guests here. So we're going to continue here. Don't go anywhere. She's not wearing her Star Trek earrings though this morning. A little disappointed. A little disappointed. It's okay. All right, we're going to continue. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We'll be back with more right after this.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Ha, nice beard.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay. Sarah Montalbano, our guest here this morning. Brian brings up another thing here. This is one of my pet peeves that we rarely get into because we rarely we rarely talk about it. But this has been on my bingo card as far as pet peeves go for years. And Brian says, in conjunction with the access to resource, Alaska really needs to revamp its mineral royalty scheme. The net profits approach is too easy to manipulate. And I've said that for years, that not only do we need to revamp the oil taxation structure because we're leaving money on the table there, but the royalty scheme on minerals, it's a net profit thing, right? So they are only paying a severance on their net, meaning whatever it costs, they can write everything off and it's only their net profits. And I guarantee you that if you're one of these big mining companies, you've got a room full of accountants that can basically pencil whip anything to make it look like we only made $1 this year. We're just going to pay $1, right? And the state of Alaska doesn't have the accountants to go back and audit or do, back. I mean, that's a huge thing, right?
Interesting. Yeah. I'm not all that familiar, so I'd have to defer, but that does seem like that could be a gameable system.
Well, it is. It's a totally gameable
Yeah.
system, and especially when you look at the Constitution and it says you're supposed to develop the resources to the maximum benefit of the people. A net profit tax seems like that's a little ridiculous. I'm not saying that you bust anybody or break the bank, but when you take an ounce of gold or copper or zinc or lead out of the ground, you're never getting that back, right? It's a one-time resource, and so you should be getting a good, solid return no matter what it costs to. I mean, if they're not making enough money to pull it out right now, then so be it. Maybe down the road when it's more critical, they'll pull it back out. But it's something I think that we need to. I think it's something that we need to look at.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's something I should research too. Mining is such a multi-billion-dollar projects for a lot of these things, and that kind of segues into the next topic of the mini and micro minerals, because there's a lot of several mines actually. A cobalt mine had opened, and China had just flooded the market, dove the price down, and they had to suspend operations because they couldn't economically do it anymore. So I have to wonder where royalties could come into that, because sometimes it's slimmer margins than we might think.
Yeah, no, and I know sometimes it is a slim margin. Don't get me wrong, but
No, I get that.
and I'm not looking to gouge anybody,
No.
but we have received so little over the years when you look at the actual numbers and revenues and things like that for a resource that's non-renewable. It's not coming back. That's that's a thing. It's a thing, and it concerns me for sure. All right, we are going to talk about Rick says, Sarah, are you a space geek also? Yes. Yes. If we want to know what Sarah really believes, though, we have to ask her the question: next gen or the original series? That's the question. Which is your favorite?
I gotta go with Deep Space Nine.
You got to go with DS9. See,
DS9.
that's when we know we've got a political junkie, because DS9 is full of intrigue and politics and everything else. DS9 is good. I've actually just finished watching Strange New Worlds.
Ooh, interesting.
Have you seen that yet?
No, I'm not a fan of the new Trek. I watched one episode of Discovery and I thought it was terrible.
Discovery is not it's well, it's not as good as many others, although it does get better. But the Strange New Worlds, if you haven't watched that, that's got a real feeling of the original series feeling. It's super good. Anyway, sorry, we geeked out for a second. What is the state tax on minerals and mining? It's a convoluted system, but it essentially ends up being something like 3% of the net. I think if I go, Sarah's going to deep down into this for us. We're going to give her some homework. But it's 3% of the net, which means is that right? 3%. I think it's 3% of the net. But it's a net profits tax, which means basically they can write everything in the world off against it, and then there you are. But we'll see what Sarah comes up with here sometime in the future. I'd love to have a future show on that. All right, let's go. We're going to jump back in here. I know I'm a little distracted this morning. Hey, get back on topic, he says. Here we go.
public enema number one. Oh, wait, sorry. Public enemy number one, which makes more sense. On the other hand, he's a little bit of a pain in the Michael Duke show.
I'm a perfect angel. What are you talking about? All right, Sarah Montalbano continues with us, and she writes. She has a Substack, which is for those of you who don't know what Substack is. It's like a blog, but it's like a news. It's like a magazine that it's like for your own personal magazine. She calls hers Montalbano Mondays. It's sarahmontalbano.substack.com. And she writes about, well, mostly energy stuff these days, but she's written about everything from education to minerals to foreign policy to everything else. But one of this latest pieces that she wrote, and I saw this a couple weeks ago, and I wanted to bring her on then, but I held back, is that she wrote an article that is entitled "The Mini and Micro Minerals the U.S. Can't Ignore." And I'm like, mini and micro, what are mini and micro? I had to go get the information. And it was some great stuff. So, Sarah, educate us here. Mini and micro minerals, what the heck are they, and what does it mean for us?
Thank you. I'm super glad you picked up on this because this was the first original piece that I really wrote for the Substack. And it came to my attention from public comments on the U.S. critical minerals list. It was from the Society for where is it? Mining, Metallurgy, and Exploration, SME. And I've got a couple of colleagues there. And what they discovered is that a lot of these so-called critical minerals actually have a really tiny domestic demand in the U.S. And they call them mini and micro minerals. Some of these minerals have less than 1,000 metric tons of annual consumption per year, and that becomes really difficult to economically mine. And so I wanted to talk about it and highlight that stuff because I think there's a lot of concern right now, at least in the news, about the Trump administration taking stakes in some of these mining companies. And it starts to make a little bit of sense when you look at the economics of some of these minerals.
Right. And what's really interesting is that a lot of these, and these are really, a lot of these are critical minerals, especially for technology. And what most people don't understand, and you say it in here, 33 of the 54 critical minerals on the list from the USGS, the critical minerals list, 33 of the 54 are byproducts of other mining operations. You're not going specifically for these things. It's a byproduct of something else that you're mining. And that's kind of crazy when you look at it. And some of these some of these you've probably never heard of. You've probably heard of beryllium, but have you heard of terbium? Terbium, which we have to use 2 tons of, that's an infinitesimal amount overall, but that 2 tons is worth almost $3 million. But again, it's a byproduct of something else. And that's what I didn't really understand. It's not like I'm purposefully going out to get terbium. I have to mine something else, and terbium is almost a waste product at that point, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating because a lot of miners, when they're looking at these projects, the byproducts aren't actually an advantage to them in the economic sense. In fact, the comments from SME go over this fact, and they say it is not uncommon for a mine operator to consider the presence of one or more byproduct critical minerals as a problem rather than as a resource because they create processing headaches. You have to add unnecessary circuits to the milling facilities. It's not a huge economic payoff. And so that's why there are mines that proliferate. Like the Stibnite Gold Project in Idaho. I use that as an example because it's a really, really good one. It says the quiet part out loud. They're going to be producing the critical mineral antimony, which is really important for military applications, munitions, and things like that. Very important for national defense. But they say that this is backed by the financial power of gold production. That's in their press release announcing that their permits have been approved. This antimony is a byproduct of lead and gold and other precious metals. So they wouldn't be able to do this processing for antimony at all if they weren't associated with a gold deposit. That can be the economic way that it pencils out.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
people don't think about that. So the conclusion on the, and again, there's all kinds of, I mean, I was looking at this list and I'm like, I have not heard of half of these. I haven't heard of half of these minerals that are on the critical, that are high elevated risks of
Mhm.
things that we need for what we have today, which is day-to-day, day-to-day stuff. Niobium.
Mhm.
What's niobium? Well, it's used in medical equipment, right?
Mhm.
Rhodium, samarium. What are all these things? But these are very, very high critical minerals that mostly, not only do we have a supply chain risk because we can't get them in large quantities, but again, mostly they're put together as a byproduct. And so now we have to change the way that we look at mines and figure out, okay, great, you're getting gold or lead or copper or zinc or whatever the main mineral is that is in the hundreds of millions of metric tons of usage to
Mhm.
get this 1 metric ton of blank, whatever that critical mineral is. And so it changes the way that we do things.
Mhm. Absolutely, and I think that's why we're seeing a lot of interest, from, frankly, the federal government. And I'm a free marketeer, right? This sets off alarm bells for me too, but it makes a lot of sense in some ways that the administration is investing, grants and loans, and taking stakes in companies for these kind of minerals, because the Defense Department needs to ensure that they have them, and they need a secure domestic supply, because if you overlap some of these tonnages and the market value alongside the risks on the critical minerals list, there's 54 minerals proposed for the 2025 list, and you will see that most of these are being imported from China for almost all of the US's consumption, and we're actually improving on some minerals, but not nearly as fast enough as we would need to be if there's a serious risk of any geopolitical problems here.
Right.
I certainly don't have the clearance to know, but
Right. Well, and we have to,
yeah.
again, we have to have that stability, right? I mean, that's
Mhm.
the thing. That's what, and a lot of these minerals are not that, I mean, there's not a lot of profit in it. They're
Mhm.
absolutely necessary, but there's not a lot of profit in them. You
Yeah.
use an example that, for example, the US uses 4.3 million
Mhm.
metric tons of aluminum, yet we only use 14 tons of dysporium, which
Mhm.
is, what is it? I don't, and it's a critical mineral, and it's only valued at $5 million. So that's a fraction of the overall mining
Mhm.
industry, but we still need it.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that kind of kills me, is we just don't know. So
Mhm.
what's your, what is the long and the short of it here? Do we have to change the way that we analyze this? And again, as you said, protecting ourselves from the supply chain so that we're not dependent on foreign sources. Should we be looking at this and then changing the way that we look at mines overall when it comes to that?
It's a tough question, and I don't know if I've settled on an opinion fully here. There's a lot of rationales I think make sense for the government has come in and invested in three mining companies. One of them is Trilogy Metals, which holds mining claims in the Ambler mining district. So I'm of course always wary of these kind of endeavors, but there is a rationale that if the U.S. taxpayer is going to be putting money into this, they might stand to benefit from stock increases. And that might be a better thing than doing a grant or a loan. There's also that, you know, we really do need to secure some domestic sources of these things, and historically, that's happened in places like the Stibnite mining district. That mine has historically produced a lot of important materials for World War I and World War II. This is, I think, government support for mines isn't as unusual as you would imagine based on the news reports this time around. So it's difficult because the government is not a run-of-the-mill minority shareholder. The government, frankly, doesn't know anything about how to operate and have the technical expertise to do mining, and that is where I would be concerned about these kind of things. Is if we're deciding that the government wants to come in and throw its weight around, that isn't something that we'd want. But honestly, I'm going to have to withhold my judgment and see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, and again, I know that many people have been concerned when they saw that the president had decided to take minor ownership stakes in several of these things. But that's not unusual. And
Mhm.
again, it was more to secure the government's ability to get those critical minerals for
Exactly.
whatever projects that they have, right? So it's not unusual. This has happened before, but
Mhm.
there is a slippery slope here.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'd also note too that it's a good thing that it's a good signal to investors that the government isn't gonna get it in its own way with permitting and stuff like that. If they have stake in this project in this area, they're probably going to do what they can to, keep permitting moving along. So investors, all of these companies, their stocks just spiked once this news came out. So, it's hard to know, I think, how it's gonna shake out.
Right. And you challenged me because I had never heard of mini and micro minerals, and then you decided at the end to rename it. And I think that that's a genius way because you don't call them. You said they shouldn't be called mini and micro. They should be called what?
Orphan minerals,
Yeah.
and that was my immediate thought when I had talked to my colleague about this. I said, "Mini and micro, that's kind of a handful." Yeah, I think of them a little bit in comparison to orphan drugs. We have, there are drugs that treat very rare diseases that don't financially pencil out well for drug manufacturers, and they get certain tax breaks, incentives, whatever, to do that. So I thought orphan minerals would be a good term for that, and we'll see if it catches on.
Yeah, we'll see. But I mean, again, this was a fascinating discussion, and I'm going to go ahead and I'll drop the direct link to this article in the chat room. If you haven't had a chance, we've just kind of scratched the surface on this here. When you look at this, but it's a fascinating discussion on what we need and where it comes from and how it's such a minute. It's such a in the vast scope of mining across the globe. It's such a minute amount that there's some danger there that if we don't keep paying attention to it, or we at least don't change the way that we address the major mining components, that we need maybe again incentivizing the collection of these orphan minerals would make sense. It's a great discussion there as well. Sarah Montalbano is our guest. We're talking with her about some of her articles over on her Substack, which you can find at sarahmontalbano.substack.com. Up next, I want to talk a little bit about these so-called green jobs and how they tout the fact that, oh, look at all the sustainable energy and look at all the people we're employing. And Sarah kind of breaks it down a little bit and talks about the temporariness, the ephemeral nature of some of these jobs. And then we'll also just let her free reign a little bit there at the end, and she can talk about whatever she wants. Sarah Montalbano is our guest. The Michael Duke Show continues. Don't go anywhere. Man, where does the hour go? We start talking with Sarah, it just gets easy and easy. We're going to be back. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Back with more right after this.
We're broadcasting live through a series of tubes, allowing all of these entities to provide streaming stuff going on the internet. Well, it's kind of hard to explain. Sorry. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, Sarah Montalbano, our guest. Somebody said, somebody asked the question, are there major deposits of rare earth minerals in Alaska? And Sarah, you've been working on a lot of the energy and the mining issues and things like that, and you're probably better qualified to answer that than I am. But I know that there are
Yeah.
some big deposits of rare earth minerals. In fact, Ron Gillum, former representative, said, he said, I was told when I was in Juneau that there are rare earth materials are available throughout Alaska, but getting the permits to mine them is all but impossible. So there are some big deposits of various minerals across the state, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to say where they are exactly, but yeah, I know Alaska is one of the states that really has some deposits of this. Um, uh, where is it? There's a mine in California that actually has a lot of these rare earths, and as well as neodymium and praseodymium that are being used for magnets. And so, there are mineable deposits of these things. Rare earths as a group, there's 17 minerals in that group. They're actually not all that rare in the Earth's crust. It's just the challenge of finding them in a concentration that you can actually economically mine is the difficult question.
Right. And
Yeah.
I remember the old bumper sticker. It said, it said, "Mine the Earth. We'll worry about the rest of the planets later," or something like that, or the asteroid belt. Will be pulling in things from the asteroid belt, kind of thing. I mean, that's as we develop more and more needs for many of these minerals that probably most of us have never heard about. We're gonna have to change how we look at a lot of this, right? I mean, that's what I was kind of pointing at with the
Mhm.
orphan minerals, is that we're really going to have to dive into, how do we pull out some of these other minerals? And yes, it may be more costly, but what is the cost if we just pitch them aside as byproducts?
That's interesting. Yeah, I was doing some homework for something I'm doing next week, and the one of the articles for this really challenged my assumptions on that, and I'll give it to the audience here. The idea is that these natural resources aren't really finite in any meaningful economic sense, because what we find with dynamic capitalism is really that we find substitutes for things that we find that are getting too costly. We find better and better ways to mine these things and to produce them. I think a great example of that is hydraulic fracturing. That has really led to an increase in the availability and decline in price of natural gas. And what really matters is less the the quantity of the stuff that we have, and that we might run out of that stuff, but really what that stuff can get us in goods and services. So, if we find substitutes for lithium ion batteries, we might rapidly figure out that we don't need as much lithium as we thought we
Right.
did.
Oh,
So that's interesting.
yeah. That's interesting. And again, it drives into sometimes that scarcity drives innovation. There was what was the article that I just saw it. I didn't read the full thing, but I kind of skimmed it, and it was about, is it sodium hydride batteries or soda?
Yeah.
It's a new replacement for lithium. They're saying it's
Mhm.
better, it's more plentiful, it's less poisonous, it's blah 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 blah. And I think it was sodium hydride, but it was a
Mhm.
whole different kind of battery. That's what drives it. Sometimes that scarcity creates innovation that we wouldn't have if it was so plentiful, we wouldn't even bother to look. But when things get scarce, that's when we get us monkeys, us tool using monkeys get a little creative, right?
Exactly. Price pressure. So if all of these things stayed, incredibly cheap forever and abundant, then we wouldn't be forced into figuring out different or better ways to do things. So I don't know. I'm not sure I'm fully convinced by that yet, but I think it's a really good argument that we
I
don't need to treat these things as finite.
I I'm interested to read this article now that you said the challenge
I'll
your
send it.
would you send it to me? Because I'm interested
Yeah.
to read it. I mean, I'm not a doctoral candidate or anything like you for some of these things, but I love to be challenged in those ways, and to
Yeah.
look at it from a
I'll send you
different
the
point.
whole reading list.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
gee. Yeah. I've only got so many hours in the day, Sarah. I've only got so many hours. So we got about a minute here before we rejoin. Just on a personal note, anything fun happening for you? You got anything going on?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yesterday, American Experiment released a video that we'd been working on for a long time about my summer report on the environmental costs of wind and solar. So that's been exciting to get to put out there and promote after all this time.
The Green
Takes a
Shattered
lot.
Dreams? I love
Uh-huh.
it. Yeah. If you
Yeah.
haven't read her report, it's called Green Shattered Dreams, and I know it's up on your Substack, and I know it's on the American Experiment, but it is a fascinating read, and I'm sure some people's heads exploded when they watched that thing, or they read it, not the video, but if they read the report, because it lays out some truths that Poof, I'm sure it's just hard. It's just hard for some people to wrap their brain around because they're ideologically committed to the concept, not factually committed to the concept. It's an ideology more than it is a factual change. And that has been a fascinating thing to watch. All right. Sarah Montalbano, our guest, we're going to continue.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Huh. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
Okay. We're continuing with Sarah Montalbano. I could just get lost in the conversation. She's always got lots of great ideas. She recently was writing about different energy products. Actually, it started out with a discussion on healthcare, which I thought was great because you did some data analysis and writing with one of your colleagues over there talking about the health of the ACA health insurance markets, and it was an analysis about how I think essentially this government interventionism didn't necessarily help, right? And
Shocker, I know.
shocker that it actually drove the cost of healthcare up. But then you pivot over to this discussion on energy projects that they should basically be producing energy and not what you call unproductive jobs. I mean, kind of these ephemeral jobs. Although this is what's always touted. Look at all the jobs we're creating with this sustainable energy thing. But the thing is that they're not permanent and they end up costing. And if they are permanent, it's because you got to continually replace what you've been doing. And is that really the purpose? Isn't the purpose to create energy? Walk me through this.
Yeah. So this is in response to a report that comes out annually from a group called Clean Energy Economy Minnesota. There's also a Midwest group. Quick Googling, I couldn't find anything similar for Alaska, so we're going to go with the Minnesota numbers, just because I think it's emblematic of the issue. There's a couple points about this. We really don't. We need to think about these things. First of all, they're not outstripping the growth of the economy as a whole very much. You add a little bit of jobs more than in the general sector. The other point that I thought was really important for the Substack is that all of these clean energy jobs, 72% of them in Minnesota were for energy efficiency jobs. In the big stuff about this, energy efficiency jobs would exist in large part separately of all of this clean energy stuff. We're not, if you say clean energy jobs, we know we're thinking of, wind turbine installers, solar panel installers. We're not thinking about people who are installing LED lighting or, manufacturing your Energy Star washers. And what I found really astonishing when I was going through the numbers, 9,580 people in Minnesota are employed in traditional HVAC, heating, cooling, all of that, traditional HVAC, not even just the high efficiency HVAC. And that number is greater than the entire group that is actually classified under renewable energy generation. So the way that they are making these numbers look inflated really is that you're lumping in all of these traditional HVAC guys with your, wind and solar installers and all of those things. I thought that was really telling that these jobs that would exist anyway are being lumped under clean energy.
And it's interesting to point out that the fact that many of these jobs, and you talk about, we talk about clean energy, and they're touting this organization, the Clean Energy Economy Minnesota, is touting these clean energy jobs as one of the benefits of clean energy. Mm-hmm. And all I could think about as I was reading this article is it reminds me of the old thing where, the government paid people. This is like the WPA, right? You paid people to dig a hole with a shovel, and then you paid them to fill the hole back in. And you're like, look at the job we created. No, it's just a circular, it's like the circular firing squad, right? I mean, you're paying for this, and this is the whole China thing, right? The building boom in China where they built mega structures that sit empty today, whole cities and whole skyscrapers that sit empty. The economy was booming. No, because you were just paying to have it done. It really wasn't booming, and they're temporary. And we're seeing that now, especially if you tie this to your Shattered Green Dreams a piece that talks about what the cost of renewable, sustainable energy is. These jobs are mostly temporary, right? These are not long-term gigs.
Precisely, yeah. A full 55% of those jobs in Minnesota are in construction, and another 11% are in manufacturing. So most of these jobs are in construction. They're temporary by nature and will have less of an effect on the economy than a long-term permanent job at something like a coal-fired power plant or a natural gas plant or a nuclear plant. There aren't any sitcoms. I made this joke in the comments. There aren't any sitcoms about some Homer Simpson-esque figure going to work at the wind farm every day. But there are people going to work every day at the nuclear plant. And so I thought, this is kind of amazing that we're touting these clean energy jobs because frankly, the idea here behind an energy project is to produce energy, right? If you wanted, and my colleague and economist at American Experiment, John Phelan, made this point in an answer to this report back in 2017. If the point was to create jobs, we could hire a bunch of people to go stand in the wind farm and blow on the turbines to make them go faster. We can always, exchange shovels for spoons and add a ton of jobs for some construction project. But that isn't the point. We want increasing productivity. We don't need more jobs. We need more energy. And whatever jobs are created with that are a good thing, but not necessarily unproductive, low density jobs.
And we know what drives society. What drives society is cheap energy, right? Affordable energy. And what we're finding is that in many cases, this sustainable energy is nowhere near cheap for what it delivers. I mean, you and I have talked about that ad nauseum, that the per kilowatt hour of reliable, dependable, steady power on a per kilowatt basis is nowhere near what it is for gas or coal or nuclear when it comes to wind and solar. Not to mention the secondary and tertiary impacts of those things on the environment. I mean, somebody asked what's the environmental impact of a large solar farm on the earth beneath the solar panels. You've written about this. There's a huge impact that we don't talk. I mean, it's like, shh, don't talk about it. I mean, it's free energy from the sun, but it's free energy from the wind, but there's all these secondary and tertiary impacts. What for wind and solar? Talk about that.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this too, because this was kind of the subject of my most recent piece, which was called The Pervasive Myth of Cheap Wind and Solar, because that was starting to really frustrate me. There was a Minnesota Department of Commerce official who actually put that in an op-ed. Wind and sunshine are free. Well, great. Let's talk about the system cost of these things, because when you build in all the transmission you need to build, when you build in all of the system costs to the grid planners of having to balance the inconsistent and intermittent energy that these things produce, it's not nearly as cheap as just having your natural gas or coal plants built. And frankly, what the choice is usually is that we're choosing simply not to close down coal or natural gas early. We've already paid for these things. Let's use them till the end of their useful lifetimes. So that's a different article on my Substack. And of course, there are environmental impacts, and those simply aren't being studied enough. That really does concern me, because when you grade something for a wind turbine farm or construction panels, that's construction grading. And that really removes topsoil. It makes it more difficult to come back to agriculture later. There's just a myriad of effects here that, again, Shattered Green Dreams talks about a lot, but simply there's just so much going on that we can't realistically, I think, understand the impact of going this way for our utility scale power needs.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy when you look at it and you realize what the actual cost of these things are. And I'm glad you brought up your new article, because it's an exact thing. I mean, I've had some conversations with people, especially after reading your Green Shattered Dreams, who I'm recommending that everybody take a look at as a piece, because it explains a lot of this stuff and what the actual costs are. And we've seen this in other places, California and other places where they do these mega solar projects, and it takes up hundreds of acres of land. And again, affects it in an arable way, so it can't be used later on, or it becomes nearly impossible. We've talked about the disposal of units of solar and some of the wind turbines. We talk about the amount of maintenance, and what is the Landman thing, where he walks through, the character in the show Landman walks through what one wind turbine takes, 3/4 of an acre of concrete and 100 gallons of lube every year, and all this other kind of stuff. And he goes, how cheap is it really? And that's the big question.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I had to I hadn't watched Landman before I wrote this paper, and I heard from no less than 3 people that I had to. So I watched that scene and a couple episodes on a plane. Uh,
Yeah.
because it's absolutely true. I mean, there's so
Yeah.
much that we're not accounting for when we just say, "Oh, it's cheaper to, build more wind and solar." Well,
Yeah.
not necessarily.
Not necessarily, for sure. We're down to the last couple of minutes here. Sarah, what are you working on next? What should people be watching out for you, and why should they be subscribing to your Substack?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm hoping to do some more original pieces in the future, like my mini and micro critical minerals discussion. That was a lot of fun, time permitting, of course. As far as major projects, I have just published that paper on the health of the Affordable Care Act markets. It's not doing very well, and that has data applicable to all 50 states. So I hope you can check that out. I think the big question in a lot of the Midwest right now is going to be about data centers, and how do we balance, all of this electricity that they're supposed to need? How much is there going to be as far as demand? How do we insulate the ratepayers? So I think we're going to be engaging on that a lot in the future, and talking about how do we protect ratepayers and communities in a way that still allows data centers to flourish, and to do it from a free market perspective.
Well, and there's been a lot of discussion about how data centers, how Alaska could be, we could be beneficial for
Yeah.
all that in a lot of ways. But the question is, how do we pull it all together? That's the
Mhm.
big thing.
Yeah.
I would love to have a future discussion on that as well. Sarah Montalbano, thank you so much. As always, it's a pleasure to speak with you. sarahmontalbano.substack.com. Just Google Montalbano Mondays and you'll find it. It's the first Google result. I checked this morning just to see for sure. Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate you coming on board.
Thank you.
All right, folks, hold the line. We got more coming up. The Michael Duke Show. David asks, Sarah, have you looked at the large data center being built in Wyoming? I hadn't heard about the large one in Wyoming, but I'd like to know more about that. Again, the fact that data centers, the biggest thing is obviously the electricity. They say that they use water for cooling, right?
Mhm.
And they use some ungodly amount of water, they say, but that's really kind of misleading.
It's overblown.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because mostly they're closed loop systems, right? So they're
Mhm.
reusing. They may use a gazillion gallons a day, but most of that gazillion is just captured in the system and it just keeps repeating. But Alaska being so cold most of the time, especially the further north you get,
Mhm.
makes it easier. We just have to have an affordable energy source, and maybe this could be a trigger for a more affordable energy source, right?
Oh yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities for colder weather states. I think I'd heard about the Wyoming one. I want to say there was some consternation about it, and I would need to look into it further. I'm really seeing data centers right now as being almost the scapegoats for the utilities, because really this is in large part, first of all, the fault of the utilities for not continuing to build reliable and dispatchable generation, and also on state policymakers that are deciding that we need 20, 40, 100% clean electricity mandates, and they're driving this dispatchable power off the grid. So we're really not prepared grid wise for this kind of stuff. I think you're totally correct about the water, by the way. The water is, I think, not as big as an issue. Not as big an issue as proponents are saying it will be, and that's another thing we just did for American Experiment North Dakota. We looked at some of those claims for data centers because a lot of data centers want to site themselves in North Dakota thanks to the kind of abundant natural gas. So again, cold weather state, huge advantages to that, that you can actually do some some air cooling instead of relying on the water so much. But yeah, Alaska, I think, really needs to look at this. And one of the ways you can support data centers in this way is consumer regulated electricity, CRE. And that essentially just lets data centers and anyone else, honestly, bring power off the grid. So long as they are staying completely unconnected from the grid, they can bypass a lot of the utility regulations that slow down these processes and put a damper on things. And that protects the ratepayer. If it's not on your grid, you're not paying for it. So I like that solution.
Self-generation, right? Essentially is what you're talking about. Building a data center and they build a 12 or 15 or 30 megawatt generator that runs their own system. And all they've done is just tap into a gas line somewhere and they've got their own generation and that's all they're doing. Right.
Exactly.
And that's, although it would be nice to benefit from the economy of scale of drawing power off the regular grid because there's an economy of scale on that. But whatever it takes to get it done. It's a fascinating discussion and a great topic. And like I said, if you're not subscribed to her Substack, you should, because you'll get every time she drops something in there, you'll get something new. So I'm
Mondays at noon ET.
Mondays at noon ET. Phone
8 a.m. for all of you.
Yeah, 8 a.m. for us. Well, Sarah, as always, it is a great pleasure to talk to you, and we look forward to visiting again soon. Thanks for all you do. Thanks for all you do. Thanks for
thank you.
It's always a pleasure to hang out with you and see what's going on. And we hope you have a great weekend. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much.
All right. Sarah Montalbano, our guest here on the Michael Duke Show, doing her thing. She's that girl is smart, man. She's got a lot of stuff going on. We're just gonna keep bringing her back because she's a breath of fresh air. All right. I see that Rep Will Stapp is in the green room, and we're going to see make sure his audio is good, and we're going to bring him on board to see what he has to say. Good morning, Will. How are you?
Good, Michael. How are you?
Good. You ready to dive into this thing here?
Oh, always ready to do the diving in.
Do the diving in. Is it cold in Fairbanks this morning? What is it?
Actually, it's quite warm for this time of year. I mean, obviously, we do have snow on the ground. It is here to stay more than likely. But Halloween is a day away, and it looks like it might be good trick-or-treating for the kiddos. So
Good. Yeah, I was there this weekend, as we met and talked, but it was a little cool, a little snowy, a little icy, and I was glad to come home. And then, of course, we got hit by that storm yesterday, and it was 2 inches of slush, sleet. It was a sleet storm yesterday here on the peninsula. So I guess winter's here, no matter what we need to do. But all right, well, I've got you there in the green room. I'm going to put you back here. We're going to come back to you here at the top of the hour. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back here with Will Stapp in just a moment. Rick says, "Thanks, Sarah. Always enjoy you coming on. Make it a weekly thing." Oh, I wouldn't want to subject her to that, but I think a monthly thing is definitely a great idea for sure. Let's see. It's going to be 40 degrees here today in Fairbanks. Is that the case? Really? Man, it's 42 right now down here in Homer, which, like I said yesterday, I spent half the day outside scraping satellite dishes off because the sleet and snow was spraying right into them. It was a heck of a day yesterday, but looks like today is going to be pretty nice. So I hope it's warm and dry wherever you are. We're going to continue here Let's jump into it. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Hour 2 continues. Representative Will Stapp on our way. Back with more in just a moment. Here we go. The Michael Duke Show.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Hi there, ho there, hey there. Welcome back to the program. It is the Michael Duke Show, broadcasting live across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Appreciate you guys coming in and joining us on this beautiful Thursday. 42 degrees down here on top of the world in Homer, Alaska. Pretty warm. It looks like 39 in Wasilla and 26 in the Fairbanks area right now. Going to be kind of nice and warm and balmy. And we can only hope that winter continues to be nice and warm for this year. That's my fingers are crossed here. Like I said, I'm a wuss, man. I don't like the winters much more anymore. If they can be mild, I'm all about that. We're going to continue here. 2.5 weeks ago, we got a chance to chat with Will Stapp, representative from up in the interior. And we had some interesting and hard conversations about things like the permanent fund, about the this combining idea. We had a discussion on defined benefits and more. I ran into Will when I was up in Fairbanks last weekend, and he's like, he had more to say. He wanted to have this conversation, and I appreciated that. And I think we're going to enjoy that this morning as we jump into it. So let's get going, shall we? Representative Will Stapp from the interior joins us this morning. Wood ticks, lunatics, and politics. That's going to be the topic for today. So let's get into it and start talking. Good morning, Will. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing good, Michael. How are you? And
beautiful day.
Yeah, I know it's a nice warm day in Fairbanks. I did want to say thank you for the show yesterday. I thought that was really cool that you had the gentleman who had that documentary that he had produced on.
Oh yeah,
even if it took a long time. You know, for those people who don't know, like I came to Alaska in the Army. I was in the infantry as paratrooper, and my first deployment was in 2007, and it was in Fallujah, in Karma, right, with the 3rd and 519th Parachute Infantry Regiment. So there's always like a ton of folks that I tell people that there's a lot of people that I know that have really good stories that did a lot of really heroic things that I got to witness. And I always love it when people go on and share their stories. And it actually made me really sad to know that PBS kind of refused to tell those stories because of their own kind of internal politics for so many years,
Yeah, 17 years. For those of you who didn't catch yesterday's show, we had Michael Pack on. He was the producer and director of the new documentary called The Last 600 Meters, which is going to be coming out on PBS on the 10th of November. And it'll be on Amazon Prime as well. And it's a story in the Marines and the soldiers' own words of Najaf and Fallujah. And PBS had it sitting on a shelf for 17 years. And now they're going to finally do it. So I agree, Will. I think it was a great interview. I really enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to seeing the documentary when it comes out this next week as well. Will, you came on here a couple 3 weeks ago, and we had some. You've been fighting and debating people over this defined benefits program. We had some discussions on the permanent fund and where that's going, the permanent fund dividend. This discussion of combining the ERA and the corpus and more like that. So I know we want to get into a lot of that. So I'm going to let you drive the boat a little bit here this morning. And where do you want to start? What do you?
Yeah, let's go ahead. Let's just go ahead and jump into the topic at hand, right? So, when you take a step back and you kind of look at the history of the state's fiscal situation, really since 2014, you're going to kind of develop like a list of facts that are true, right? When the state initially faced financial difficulties, kind of the objective was there were some budgetary reductions, but most of the time the state went to the SBR and then the CBR to cover its deficiencies in its overall balance of payments, right? To cover liabilities, they decided to tap savings, okay? So, at one point there was $14 billion in the CBR and several billion in the SBR. The vast majority of that money is gone now. And the CBR sits at around $3 billion, okay? So again, there were draws taken out of those funds in order to cover, operating and capital budget expenditures that were incurred to operate state government, okay? Okay, so as we continue forward, the revenue situation has had peaks and valleys due to oil prices and volume and production and stuff like that. But ultimately, kind of the long-term fiscal situation really has not improved in the state of Alaska. And last year, you saw basically a raid on, first it was the capitalization of ADA, and it was a raid of over $100 million on the higher education fund to be able to fund state operational budget. Okay.
Right.
All right. So that kind of should send everyone a bunch of kind of warning flags versus where we are going. Right. So currently we have two accounts in the permanent fund. And, one of them is ERA, which is basically a pot of money that is appropriation availability by the legislature. It's spendable. And the legislature has a statute, a law, basically, that says, hey, we're not going to take more than 5% out of this fund to pay for things. I appropriate money for PFD or for government spending or whatever people choose to do. But remember that 5% rule is like Scouts honor rule, right? It's only as good as the 21 people and the 11 people who decide that they're going to follow that or not.
Right. It's just as protective as the PFD statute itself, right?
Well,
because they've ignored that since 2017.
Yeah, exactly, right. And you have and it kind of goes back to my pension conversation I had 2 weeks ago. Okay, so I would argue that 21 people in the House have already kind of demonstrated that they are willing to take more than 5% out of the permanent fund to spend on government. And the reason I'm going to argue that is because they passed a bill that requires a 7.25% rate of return, when the history of all pension bills, the performance of the funds is 6.8%. Okay, so we took what we know to be the historic average of all performance of pension funds, which is 6.8, around that, and we said, well, we're going to do better somehow at 7.25, and that's how we're going to pay for something. All right. Yeah. So basically, if you are comfortable with your liabilities on a pension plan, right, requiring 7.25% real rate of return, and your draw on your permanent fund is 5%, well, that pretty much means you would be okay with taking 6% instead of 5% or 7%. Right. Instead, you see what I mean? Because you've already kind of demonstrated that you are willing to do that in a different area. Okay. So the question becomes, okay, what should we do about that? And I've been in the legislature long enough to know that if you have a large pot of money that is sitting there and people want to spend money, it is almost a guarantee in life, that people will ultimately tap that big pile of money for something they want to spend on. And all you really need are the conditions being proper in order for them to do that. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, we had the disaster in Western Alaska, right? very expensive. My heart goes out to the people. And we're talking about how are we going to rebuild those communities and the total cost of that, and how much of that percentage is going to be covered by the federal disaster, and how much of that is going to be the state's responsibility. Okay. Well, I mean, if the total damage in that area is, $4 billion per se, and I don't know what the total assessment is, so I'm just kind of pontificating. And the state's responsibility of that is 20%. Okay, that's a lot of money, and the question, where do you get the money? Well, you could go to the CBR for that money, but in order to do that, the Constitutional Budget Reserve requires a higher vote threshold, i.e. 27 votes 30 votes in the House and like 16 in the Senate, in order to kind of tap that pot of money. Or if you didn't want to do anything with folks, maybe you go to this other pot of money, that's the earning reserve account, and that just requires 21 people in 11. So you can kind of start to see this problem manifest itself very obviously, in my opinion. And then you got to ask yourself, okay, well, what should you do about it? And more importantly, should the people of the state of Alaska have a say? Because I don't think that people want to be in a position where the legislature chooses what's called the path of least resistance, i.e., why cut spending if that's painful, or why tax people if that's painful, if you can just take 6% out of the ERA per year to fund your operational spending.
Right. Well, and one of the things that we pointed out, and we had Brad Keithley on Tuesday, and he discussed this specifically, how it was problematic if this one account thing comes about and they keep saying, oh, it'll be 5%. The problem is that the permanent fund has not earned enough over the last decade for most of the years in the last decade. It hasn't earned enough to protect that 5% draw. It hasn't earned more than that 5% projection. And that's part of the problem, which means it will eat into the corpus, which is the seed corn, right? That's the goose that lays the golden egg. And the more you whack it down, the smaller your return is going to be. And now you've just you've created this negative feedback loop where there's less earnings because the corpus is smaller. And yet, because there's less earnings, you have to draw more from the corpus, and then it just gets smaller and smaller. And I know everybody's like, oh, we would never do that. But the danger is, like you said, it's the path of least resistance. History has shown us that they will always take the path of least resistance in that regard.
Yeah. So this is exactly, okay. So this is kind of exactly the concept that I wanted to explore today. All right. Because you are correct, right? If you combine the funds and you take a draw on the fund that is greater than, let's say, real rate of return. So what that means for people listening is okay, I'm taking more money out of the fund than it is earning net inflation. All right. So simple math, let's say the fund earns 7% a year nominal, i.e. 7% rate of return. I take 5, but inflation is 3%. Right. So what have I actually done? Well, I've diminished the overall value of the fund by 1% by taking that amount of draw. Okay. So currently the proposal doesn't really do anything to mitigate that potential issue, but you could mitigate that issue if you were to change the proposal in a way that was designed to ensure that you weren't going to diminish the overall value of the fund. And you could do that in several ways. Number one, let's call it the simplified way. You just put the draw lower, right? So instead of saying 5% of market value of a combined fund, you say, well, we're not going to take more than 4.5 or 4.25 or something like that. Now, that doesn't actually solve the problem, because in theory, if the fund, again, if it produces less than that, you would still ultimately have that problem. The likelihood of that happening is much lower. But that also doesn't mean that you couldn't use a metric that would actually protect the fund, like using a real rate of return as opposed to a nominal rate of return. What do I mean by that? Well, if you say your draw on the fund, if you combined it, is only going to be, the lesser of 5%, or the real rate of return averaged over 6 of the last 7 years, or maybe you use 10 years, now your draw on your fund is never going to eclipse the total amount of value added earnings of the fund. Right. So you can structure it that way.
Right.
Or you could even say, okay, well, we're going to take 5% of market value of the fund, but it's only going to be on 80% of the total value. which effectively reduces the draw too. So there are ways that you could kind of look to design that would do two things. Number one, it would protect the fund from legislative appropriation. Number two, it protects the purchasing power of the fund. Three, it reduces the political influence. And this is kind of the big problem. Okay. It goes back to the pot of money problem. Okay. So if there's a pot of money around, no matter how sacred, it is only a matter of time and political pressure before people want to go into that fund because it's expedient. And the justifications are always going to be budgetary reductions are harder or taxes are more unpopular than just telling people we're going to take more money out of the ERA this year.
Right, right. Well, and I think that's the key thing. I mean, your two examples are great ideas, but again, that's not the path of least resistance, Will, because both of those lead to more austerity, right? Because both of those would lead you to say, we have less to spend. And just like it was the higher education fund, or it could be next year, it could be the PCE. PCE's got $1 billion in it, right? That could be drawn down. And I know there's some people who are vehemently opposed to that. But again, while your answers are great, I don't think they're going to get any traction because it's not expedient. It is painful. And the one thing the legislature and the politicians who've been in charge for so many years, especially in the finance committees, have been loath to do is make it painful at all for the people at all. They basically say you can have all the money you want and we won't tax you. It's the double-edged greatness, right? But the problem is that can't be done indefinitely.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And again, this is kind of the thought about exploring the concept, right? Because people could argue that if you were to combine the fund, you'd constitutionally protect it at a draw that basically wasn't going to endanger the fund. Well, I mean, the counter argument to that was, well, now you're reducing, legislative flexibility in being able to tap, large parts of money and stuff like that. I would argue like that's a pro, because
Right.
what does that do to the argument, right? So right now it's like a three-legged stool problem, Michael. You have cutting, you have taxes, and you have the permanent fund. Okay, that's your three legs, right? So if you were to combine the fund and have it to the vote of the people that would constitutionally protect it, you would basically take one of those legs on the stool and you break it off forever.
Right.
And you say,
Right.
well, now this is just a two-legged conversation, right? There's a finite amount of money. You will never take more from it because it requires a vote of the people for you to take more from it. There is not going to be a fund that has called statutory net income of realized earnings, which creates windfalls even in when assets are sold that you can tap at any time. This is the amount of money from now in perpetuity, no more, no less. And now you got to have the actual conversation on cutting spending or taxes, right?
Well, I'm just going to say, I mean, the genius of the original concept of the permanent fund and the dividend was that the corpus was protected constitutionally. They could never touch it. That was actually, I mean, Brad talked about that. And I think, wouldn't you agree that that's the genius component, that it placed that out of reach so that it would continue to generate without being threatened by the spending habits of the legislature?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So again, it's the human nature, right? I'll give you a personal example. I'm not immune to this thing either, Michael. So I often ask myself, I said, okay, I believe it would be kind of fiscally irresponsible to violate this 5% draw on the fund. But, if somebody came to me and they said, you know what, Will, if we spent $1 billion more and we were guaranteed this gas line and the spur line to Fairbanks and the gas price would be, half the current power generation cost, and all you had to do was take 7% of the fund for 1 year, I'm not going to lie, that's very you know what I mean? Wow.
Tempting, right? It's very tempting, right?
Well, and if I'm going to sit here and honestly reflect on that, for me, it's okay, well, this is just something that if it's going to be permanent, right? The corpus is always going to be permanent. The fund right now, it sits about $59 billion. Okay. $59 billion is much less than $84 billion of the value of the fund. So there's a ton of money there that if you were to realize the gains, you could burn through, and that'll ultimately probably happen over the next decade if you kind of choose to do nothing, right? Because ultimately what will happen is the draw will steadily increase. because they'll need more revenue to kind of meet the fund, and they're not going to want to do difficult things.
Well, and as we were talking about, it doesn't even require the draw amount to, even if we lock it in constitutionally at 5%, which again would require a vote of the people to increase it all. But even if we just left it at 5%, if the real rate of return on the fund doesn't match that, you eat the seed corn. So it doesn't even really matter at that point. It doesn't require another vote of the people. It could just slowly erode that value to the point to where you're not generating the money that you need anymore. And then we're back where we started, which is cuts and taxes, which again is very unpopular. But the bottom line is somebody is going to have to acknowledge that this problem exists and that you can't beat math. You can't outsmart arithmetic. And that's kind of where we're at right now. Will Stapp is our guest. We're going to continue here in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We're talking about the permanent fund and the ERA and the combining of those funds. And we're going to talk with Will about that some more here on the other side, and maybe some of the other things that's going to be putting pressure on that, including a discussion or a revisiting of defined benefits or an increase to the BSA. We'll be back with more. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show.
Listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, Will Stapp is our guest here on the Michael Duke Show. Will, I think this is the biggest danger is what we're talking is that it's being sold to us right now. This package, this 49th, whatever, the combining of the funds is being sold as our only way out. It's our only savior. We can't account for what we've got going on. And it's the only way to save the permanent fund, which again is a misnomer because as it eats into the seed corn, it's not saving anything. And if we leave it the way it is right now, and we account for inflation proofing with non-monetary assets with just appreciation instead of the other way around, we could continue to do it. And as you said, it is effectively a spending cap. It's effectively a governor on the spend because they only have a limited amount to draw from. And that really, I think, is the genesis of this. Like you said, they don't want to be constrained. They don't want to have things locked away where they can't have access to it because they want to be able to spend it. They being the powers that be and the finance committees and things like that, they don't want to have their hands tied in this.
Yeah. So, man, a couple of things here. There's always the hard work of like analyzing like what and identifying reductions in expenditures, which can be done all the time in the legislature, right? So I have one of my favorite binders I brought for the people who are watching to see. This is 10 years of bills that were passed with that cost money just for the health department to do things. Okay. You see this? This is all the things that we told people in the health department that we wanted them to do. Okay. So it turns out when you tell departments that you want them to do things, right, those things tend to cost money and administrative time and drive up your overall expenditures. So like statutory obligations, legal obligations. All right. So the real work that you need to do when you talk about reducing the state's overall operating budget expenditures is you go through these things, and you say, okay, when we passed these things or we told the department to do something, how did that actually work out? How much did that cost? And is there certain efficacy in a program that is working or not? If it's not working, you should cut it or reduce it or change it. And like, that's how you go in and you reduce expenditures. That's why doing stuff like zero-based budgeting is important. But, that's still a separate conversation between like, what do you do with the big pot of money in the ERA? Because as long as that big pot of money exists, like you're not going to have the level of pressure or like, ability or time to go through and like create this stuff, right? Like how many people have binders of 10 years of bills that were passed that cost money and could articulate like what those things were supposed to do, how much they were supposed to cost at the time, and like, are they actually working today? And my answer to you is going to be like, not many, right? So like, how do you ensure that your government is operating the most efficiently as possible? And then people are actually going to put the time and the work in to look at actually reducing expenditures and making efficiencies in the budget. And like, you're right that under the current proposal, that there is the risk that you would like draw down the seed corn. My argument's going to be like, you could change that proposal to ensure that that doesn't happen, right? Like you could use you could use a real rate of return in your POMV draw, instead. You could use a greater average, you could use a lower percent of market value draw, or you could figure out some other type of control mechanism that really takes it off the table. Now, the question to that, though, is this about a cash grab, or is this about protecting the fund from appropriation of the legislature? Right. Like, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, look, I think that people who talk about this, like, kind of fundamentally understand that you got to protect this earnings reserve account from ad hoc draws. That's what I think. But if you design a mechanism that they want to combine the fund with, and they say, okay, well, this is just going to make sure that the legislature can't really ever feasibly diminish the value of the fund. And like, are you going to be okay with that? And they might say, you know what, actually, this was just a big cash grab idea we had, and we don't want to limit ourselves.
Right.
Like,
well, we're about to rejoin the radio, but and I'll make my point when we come back. But those are all good ideas. The problem is the execution. How do you make it work, and are they willing to make it work? And I think that's the bigger question here. So we'll come back with that, and then we'll jump back into this. Will Stapp is our guest. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. Here we go. Let's get to it.
The Michael Duke Show. Seriously humorous with a pinch of intellect. Sorry. That is humorous. Here's Michael Dukes.
All right, we're continuing with Representative Will Stapp, who's laid out some pretty great ideas as far as other options for how we could do this, and whether it's a rolling average, whether it's a reduction of the POMV draw, whether it's a higher averaging, or whether it's a POMV draw on a smaller percentile than 100% of the permanent fund itself. All of those are great ideas, Will. The problem is that each one of them is going to require effort and a little bit of pain. And if that's the case, they could do that already with the way the system sits right now. See, that's the problem. This is all about aversion. They're all averse to cutting the size of government or to discussing implementing some kind of tax because it's painful, and they don't want to be the guys that bring the pain. They don't want to be the ones to give the bad news. So all those ideas you have, while they're great, they all eventually lead to the same road, which is you're going to have to cut the size and scope of government, or you're going to have to increase revenues through taxes or something else, right? I mean, that's really the bottom line here. You're just offering a different pot of poison to them at that point in their minds.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, ultimately, you're right. All roads lead to the same train station, right? And that train station is the station of what I call hard decisions in life, right? And the funny thing about me, Michael, is for some reason I tend to gravitate toward doing hard things. Like I said, I volunteered for both my deployments to Iraq. I used to jump out of planes as paratrooper in the infantry, So I just like naturally like that. I get up super early, because I enjoy telling people I can get up at 4:30 in the morning and go do stuff,
Right. Exactly.
And, and I'm not gonna sit here and be like overly optimistic and tell you like, okay, well, if we incorporate these things, maybe people won't do it, right? But my argument's gonna be like, look, if we at least attempt to like listen to this argument and say, okay, if this is about protecting the permanent fund for future generations and ensuring that the draw is protected from the legislature, the entire value of the fund should have constitutional protection, right? And if that's something that people are willing to do, we'll see if they're willing to do that or not. And you just design that with a control mechanism that ultimately goes to the people of Alaska. And you just got to level with the people of Alaska, like we talked about last time I was on the show. And I'll be the first person to tell you, I'll be like, look, folks, if we don't take this pot of money away from legislature appropriation or governor, it will ultimately get burned through. And then you'll have another set of people who are in elected office, right, who can kick a can down a road for another 4 or 5 years before they got to do the hard things. And then, like, you know, not only will we not have a dividend, right, but you'll have like a massive like train wreck at the end because you won't have any type of sustainable drop.
No, and I've been saying, you know, in the back of my mind, my whole card has always been, well, at least if we crash and burn, at least if we hit rock bottom, we'll at least be able to rebuild it, and we will have the permanent fund corpus there to at least generate some revenue, and so we'll at least have something. And Brad Keithley pointed out, well, if they get access to this, there will be no rock bottom until the permanent fund itself is drained down to nothing, and then we'll still have to rebuild, and now we won't have any seed corn, now we won't have any. I mean, that was just depressing to me. But you're exactly right. This is all about avoidance. We thought we were out of road to kick the can down again. This is their attempt to build more road to kick the can down for a few more years, maybe another decade or whatever, to the point to where then they'll have to make those decisions. But most of them will be out of the legislature, so it won't matter then. Won't be their problem, right? That's kind of the thing. So, Will, I want you to you've kind of laid out a lot of this stuff. Give me your elevator pitch as to why we shouldn't combine the funds and what we should be doing to fix the problem. Can you do that? Can you? I know you made it. Talk to me like I'm 5 and tell me why we shouldn't combine the funds and what we should do to fix this.
Okay, so all right. So I'm going to hold the position that you probably should combine the funds, but you should use the control mechanism that would ensure that you aren't diminishing the overall value. If I were to argue the other way, though, I would say, look, you already have a protection on the principle of the corpus. The legislature has so far demonstrated that it's not going to take ad hoc draws on the fund. And even though that there's pressures to do so for spending now, those pressures haven't materialized in order for the legislature to take more than a 5% draw on the fund. Obviously, that was not a very good elevator pitch for not combining the funds, because I just don't believe that the pressure is not going to continue to build until somebody takes an ad hoc draw. I would argue that, like, under the current proposal, right, it certainly creates a scenario in which you could reduce the seed corn of the principal if you were to combine the funds, in a potentially, you know, depending on the rate of return. But I would say it's probably easier just to create a control mechanism and mitigate that, and to take the fund off the table entirely, than it would be to leave the ERA in statutory net income generating money to take out of, right? So, like, there's pros and cons, I think, of both approaches, but I can tell you, like, I just know, like, with high degree of certainty, that if you have a fund that has billions of dollars in it, it is only a matter of time before people start taking more money out of there than they should, right?
Right.
And that just creates a systemic problem at some point in the near future that is catastrophically painful, as opposed to just painful. You know what I mean?
Well, and I guess let me ask this, because you've laid out all the reasons why this could be a bad idea, and you've laid out concepts and guards that could be put in place to prevent it. But I think if you're honest with me, so I'm a little confused here, because if you're honest with me, you realize that your ideas are sound, but they're not going to get any traction, because, again, it creates problems. So how can you advocate for the combining of the funds if you can't get those guards in place, right? I mean, because right now the corpus is protected, period. We have a guaranteed protection of the corpus right now. If we overdraw the ERA, they can only draw so much, and then it's gone. They still can't touch the corpus. So how can you advocate for combining of the funds without those guards, knowing that the potential is there to then tap it? So I guess that's
sorry, I misunderstood your question. Yeah, no, the answer is real simple, Michael. Like, if they're not willing to put control mechanisms, then you're not doing it. You know what I mean? And you know why? Like, now you know the motivation, right? Like, if we're not willing to apply some level of control mechanism, then the primary motivation then is just to spend all the money, right?
Right. Well, that's been the plan since 1999, when they first introduced that POMV idea and put it to the people, and the people said 82% said hell no.
Yeah.
And yet later on in 2014, 2015, they finally passed it in the Senate. And this has been a slow, inexorable slog to this point of they want access to that fund. That's the bottom line. It's a huge pot of money that they've been unable to touch. This is a push to try and get access to it.
Yeah. And I mean, we'll see, right? I mean, like, look, I plan what I'll do, just so everybody knows, is like, okay, so what we'll do is we'll explore some of these control mechanisms, and we'll see if we can talk about in House Finance this coming session, okay? Because the resolution's already in the House Finance Committee. One of the co-chairs of the bill. We'll say, okay, like, are we serious about doing this or not? And then, you'll know, like, quote scripture, you'll know them by the fruits, right? They shoot all the ideas down. If you go through them, you kind of know the motivation. And then the answer is like, okay, well, this is just effectively a long-term cash grab.
Right.
If not, and like, that's the only way that you can kind of measure the motivations of people, right? I mean,
then that's a hard no from you, right? If there's no mechanisms of control.
If the system is designed to take a aggressive draw on a combined fund, that has a real chance of like reducing the overall fund value over time in perpetuity, well, then like the fund's no longer permanent. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly.
Then you should name it. You should change the name of it if you want to do that, right?
To a temporary fund, right? To temporary, impermanent fund. Right?
It's the ride or die fund. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
that's what you call it.
I want to talk about some of the pressures that we're going to see in the next session. You've talked about them with the defined benefits, and of course, we got more coming up with the BSA increase and all that. But we are up against the break, so we're going to continue here in just a moment. Will Stapp is our guest. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We'll return with more in just a moment. Don't forget, you can always join us on Facebook, facebook.com/Michael Duke Show/live if you want to jump into the chat room and talk with us during the commercial break. Feel free to come on board and join us. We'll continue with more in just a moment.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
I'm glad you clarified that, Will, because I was a little confused there when you were saying, I mean, yes, in an ideal world, if we were going to combine the funds, we would have those restrictions and those governors on it. But if they were willing to put the restrictions and governors on it, they would be fixing things already without having to combine the funds. And that's the problem, right? I mean, it's just too juicy a target, too big a pot of money for them not to want to get access to it and be able to, maybe in their minds are saying, oh, we wouldn't overdraw it intentionally. But we know that that's what's going to happen, especially when the rate of return of the permanent fund over the last 10 years, you can look at it and see that it doesn't equal the draw in real terms. That's the problem.
Yeah. And again, like that's kind of what I mean about the difference between real and nominal, right? And then like those, but again, those are all metrics that you can control from, and maybe they won't do it, and then you have your answer, right? But like I would say, I don't know if people are like unwilling. Well, some people are ideologically unwilling to tackle the problem of the spending and government efficiency, right? And like, that always kind of makes me sad because it approaches governance from what I would call bad philosophy. It approaches the problem saying, well, the government is the most efficient thing ever, and if we just feed it more things, it'll do things great. And like that is like
right.
horribly untrue in like almost every aspect.
Right. Well, that's the whole argument for the latest BSA, right? If only we had more money, we could fix all this stuff. And we don't want to talk about policy. Just give us more money and we'll fix it with no plan. I mean, that's part of the problem.
Yeah. I mean, again, like, so what you do is you identify like cost increases and pressures, and you can separate them from fixing issues. All right. And ideally, you try to do both. All right. But no, like throwing money at something is generally not a good fix. And I'll give you a really good conversation I had yesterday with folks about a bill on contracting, right? So right now, the state is basically, ideally we're supposed to be net 30 on our payment to our vendors, contracts, nonprofits, et cetera. But like, there's not a single department RDU component in the Department of Health that can pay their bills within 30 days. Okay, they're like net 60 and net 80 and net 74. all right, so these people who are vendors of the state are like, hey, can you guys pass a law saying like pay us on time, or you got to have an interest rate, it's like 10.5% annualized compound, right? That's what the current rule is on contracts. Okay, so in the mind of these vendors, they're like, well, then the state will have an incentive to like pay the contracts on time. And I said, unfortunately, you are absolutely wrong. What will happen is the state will still not pay you on time, and then we'll just pay you more money over a longer period of time, because we'll probably end up paying you worse, because the reason they're not paying you on time is because the leadership and the condition and the technical pressures are not there to pay you on time.
Right.
So unfortunately,
and it's not their money either. That's the other.
Yeah, but that's what I brought up. I'm like, look, what's going to happen is like, yeah, we're still going to pay a net 90, and now we're going to pay you like 2% interest. Maybe it'll go worse. Like knowing the state, it probably goes from net 90 to net 100, because it's not their money. The motivation to pay on time is not there, right? Like, because there is no penalty, right? And also, like, the people who are not paying for whatever reason, are still going to get pay increases and step increases and promotions. You know what I mean? Like, so the incentive structure is not there.
There's no consequences for not paying on time. I mean, the question should be, how do we motivate those who are participating to actually do what they're supposed to be doing to begin with? And that has to do with meritocracy and technology and a bunch of different other things.
Yeah, well, exactly. And like the real problem is the departments are attempting to do too many things that they don't have capacity to do. Okay, that's the fundamental problem. So how do you solve that problem? And it goes back to that binder that I showed you, is your 10 years of laws that cost money. Okay, like what you do, and I use the health department because it's what I'm most familiar with, and I spent the most time with. Like you talk about payment of SNAP benefits, it's a good example. Okay, so health department couldn't get SNAP benefits paid in time, so the solution was just to basically rubber stamp everyone who applied for SNAP. All right, now that created the worst payment error rate of SNAP in the country. Of like 40% of the people on SNAP were like not supposed to be getting the benefits. Okay, that's crazy, right? But
which increased the workload, which exacerbated the problem, right?
Yeah, which got us a bigger fine from the federal government. Like all these people are like, oh, it's terrible that we got fined from the feds and people are hungry. I'm like, well, actually, the fine this time is because we're giving way too many people food stamps who aren't entitled to food stamps. That's why we're getting fined.
Right.
And it's like,
go ahead. I'm sorry. 30 seconds.
So keep in mind, like, what was the solution? So legislature passed a bill, and the bill was like, well, we know that the department can't do this job, but what we're going to do is we're going to increase the amount of eligibility for food stamps. So we're going to add a bunch of people to the food stamp rule. That's our solution. Like, that's a terrible idea. You know what I mean? Like, why would you do that? You can't give the normal people food stamps. Why would you have tens of thousands of people?
Well, Will, not to be too cynical, but it's because now they've created an even bigger constituency that can say, hey, look, they gave us what we wanted. And that's part, I mean, again, that's part of the problem. That's why they want to spend the money. That's why they want to do all this stuff, because it gets them recognition. And when they bring home the bacon, it gets them reelected. That's the bottom line. All right, hold the line. Will is our guest. We're going to continue.
The Michael Duke Show, proudly splitting the left versus right dichotomy. Yeah, I had to look that word up too. I don't think it means what he thinks it means. Here he is, though. That guy, Michael Dukes, the one with the show.
Okay, continuing with Will Stapp, one final segment here this morning. We were just having a beautiful conversation about, if they could fix it, if they could do it. But the problem's in government, and the problem in government, of course, is that it continues to grow. That's just its nature. Doesn't make it evil, doesn't make it anything else. That's just the nature of government. And we're seeing that already. So not only are we talking about combining the funds with the current spending, we're still talking about increasing the spend. Now, you had a conversation with us last time about defined benefits and what that's going to cost. So that's going to be a big bone of contention in this next session. And we already know that the education lobby is coming back for even more BSA on top of that, and whatever else is added to the mix. So talk to us about the pressures of upward spending on top of everything else that we just talked about, where we can't even afford what we got, but there's going to be even more spending. What do you see coming, and what do you what's the problem here?
Well, Yeah, there's kind of the fundamental natural pressures of pay and step increases and contract negotiations. Those things are going to happen. They're going to grow the kind of liabilities that you have to pay out. And then there's, let's call it the wants and maybe needs, depending on who you ask. I would kind of say wants. Like everyone kind of always wants more money, right? The social services folks are going to want higher grant levels for nonprofit services. The education folks are going to want more money for education. The benefits people are going to want better money spent on benefits. And, the capital project folks are going to want more money invested in capital projects. So there's always going to be an unlimited amount of pressures on the budgets. People are going to come to Juneau and lobby for money. But there is a finite amount of money. But the problem is there's like a really interesting phenomenon that happens to people in Juneau, Michael. I call it catching the fever, okay? Like catching the spending fever. And I'll give you an example, okay? Last year, the initial education bill, I call it like the education bill of all education bills. It was the absolute mother lode of education spending. It was like $1 billion. It was like inflation proof everything. And it was like, if you were someone who like wanted education funding, it was like the absolute creme de la creme, right? And the House majority, they kind of discharged this bill from the Education Committee, sent it to House Finance. And like I talked to folks, I was like shocked that they would do that on a procedural motion rather than just wait for one of their own members to get back. And the reason I was shocked, I said, was because, this bill's great, but you don't have $1 billion to give education next year.
Right.
I mean, the money's up there. So like there isn't much value in having a conversation on a pipe dream when you don't have the money.
Right. Like the T-shirt says, how do you pay for it? Right. I mean, that's the question.
Yeah, well, and this isn't even in the realm of possibility. Okay. This is so far. This is, this is like me telling you, Michael, I have 1 trillion tons in gold, but it's on the moon. Okay.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Great. Great to have it. But how are you going to get it?
Yeah. So like, okay. So the bill comes to House Finance and all these people are talking about how wonderful it would be if we did all these things and the kids. So I kind of asked them like, okay, well, like, I'm not going to dispute the merits of like this funding and inflation adjustment. I'm like, that would be, cool. Especially if you could guarantee good utility of the money. Obviously you couldn't, but let's just assume you could. I said, but like, where are we going to get the money? And the answer was, well, but the kids. And I was like, well, I mean, I don't think we can get the money from the kids. I'm pretty sure the kids don't have $1 billion,
Exactly. I was just going to say from the kids. Exactly. That's where you're going to get it. You're going to steal from the future. That's what you're going to have to happen.
So, I looked around the committee table and like everyone was like, and I couldn't figure out if this was like a PR, like a political thing, like a wish thing, or if they were like serious about this. Right. And I started to think, I think these people actually think we can pass this bill right now. So I looked at the co-chair of finance of bills. I said, hey, you know what? I'm going to move this bill out right now. Then you guys can pass it. Right. And keep in mind, like I'm in the minority. Right. So like I don't have the power to do that. Like they have to move that bill on their own. And this is like $1 billion. I'm like, I don't see how you can pay for this bill. But I mean, if you guys are going to pass it, go ahead. And they all voted to move it out. And I looked around. I'm like, what? Out of that, like what? But that's the fever, though. You know what I mean? Like
you're serious. Well, they don't live in reality. That's the thing. No. It's all the stuff we want to have, and we'll figure it out later. I mean, that's kind of the answer, right?
Well, I would say to their credit, like a couple of days goes by, right? And then people are like, oh, man, we shouldn't have done that. And then the majority leader of the coalition blamed me on the floor, like I had the power to do that. And they made changes to the bill to make it a little more responsible. It was still too much money, so I voted against it. But that's the fever I'm talking about. Like in the moment, like people got all jazzed up and they did this decision, which is like a horrible decision, like a wickedly irresponsible, and because they wanted it so bad. All right. So like that's when to kind of dial the conversation back. Like that's when like, whoa, I got to take this pot of money and take it away from myself,
Right. Well, that's what they're coming back with, right? I mean, we already know they're going to come back and try and put another $1,000 BSA, another $1,000 into the BSA, because that was their ultimate goal, was right, $1,700, $1,800, $1,900 in the BSA. So they're already saying that they're going to come back, and there'll be more of that madness. Not to mention defined benefits, not to mention employee contracts, which are coming up. These are all going to be increases.
Yeah. Well, and of course, I'll point out to them like, I mean, like what taxes they're going to incorporate to pay for that. Of course, they're not going to do that because they know it's election year and taxes are unpopular. So, it's kind of like the cart before the horse, right? If they can get all the spending, then they can go to the taxes later after they get reelected, right? Like, and I'm, so like my job is going to be like to tell them constantly, I suppose being in the minority is like, if you want to spend money, you got to tax people or you got to cut spending or just tell people how much of your dividend you're going to take, right? So,
right.
Like a couple of years ago on finance, I went through this exercise. I liked it. I mean, I think it might have been a little misinterpreted by, Brad and some of the other people. It was like when people would propose like all these new spending items, I would calculate exactly how much of people's PFD it was going to come out, and I would try to make them cut that, right? I said, okay, well, you want to spend $10 million on this. That's $27 or that's $48 from somebody's check this year. Just tell them you're going to take $48 out of their PFD and spend it on this, or $150 out of the PFD.
Right.
Because the people should know that those are the decisions that people are actively making.
Right. And that, I'm sure that was highly unpopular, right?
Oh,
because
it was incredibly unpopular.
They don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear. And quite honestly, Will, we're down to the last 3.5 minutes here, but quite honestly, I'll be surprised if we get a PFD next year. I really will. It's election year, so maybe we get a small little flavor or whatever, but there's only $660 million left in permanent fund payouts. That's what this $1,000 was. And we're already $1 billion upside down. So, I mean, this could very well have been the last payment that we got. I mean, we just don't know.
So I'm gonna say, actually, Michael, I think that you probably will get a PFD next year, but it'll be artificially created, and the way they'll do that is, like I said, there's some weird lines of thought among people in Juneau. Not everyone, but some people believe that if the dividend is below $1,000, let's say if it's $900, the people are somehow going to realize that the dividend is being spent on other things, where they would not realize that at $1,000. I think that's kind of a silly notion. I think people are not that dumb. You know what I mean? But they believe that. All right. So, like, here's the truth. The truth is, if you were to have balanced the last budget properly without a raid on other funds, the dividend would have been $850. Okay. But they didn't want the dividend to be $850 because somehow you would notice that, or you wouldn't notice it at 1,000. Okay.
Right.
That's that weird Juneau thinking. So instead, you raided the higher ed fund, you liquidated other things, and you underfunded operational expenses on known things like fire service and stuff like that.
Right.
Like, and this goes back to like the ERA draw. All right. So like, if that's the prevailing wisdom among people, that $1,000, that 4 digits is some sort of magical number where you'll suddenly be awoke, the giant will awake, if it goes to 999.
Right.
And then people will get mad and throw out their elected officials in a vote. Well, then of course you're going to take more money out of the ERA, like, to not let that happen. You know what I mean?
I would hope that would happen, but I mean, I don't know. This is so frustrating to watch. Will, appreciate you coming on, my friend. That's some great stuff. I'll give you a chance here in a second to summate. Don't go anywhere. Folks, that was Will Stapp, representative from up in the interior. We're out of time for today, but we got more coming up tomorrow. Tomorrow is Firearms Friday. Chance to sound off on issues of a 2A nature right here on the program, so make sure you stick around for that tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., bright and early. Don't forget, you can also check out the podcast available on Spotify or wherever you find podcasts. And, of course, the replays on Facebook, YouTube, and Rumble. The Michael Duke Show. Be kind, love one another, live well. We will see you guys tomorrow. Have a great day. All right, Will, final bite at the apple here. I mean, you're right. It's a crazy thing. Oh, they won't. If it's $999, they'll be mad. But trust me, there's plenty of people that are mad already, but they're just not doing anything about it. I don't think that reducing it by much, I mean, maybe that's in their mind, but reducing it by any more than that, I don't think is necessarily going to jumpstart some kind of great revolt. Because it didn't happen when I thought that was going to happen when Walker cut it the first time. I figured for sure that you were going to see a bunch of people get unelected because they didn't try and override him, but it didn't happen. And so it's the apathy that we're dealing with now. But I want to give you the last couple minutes here. Any final thoughts on all this stuff, where you're sitting and where we go from here?
Yeah, I mean, in conclusion, like at the end of the day, Michael, I always feel like ask yourself a couple of questions, right? if the current trajectory continues, like the legislature will ultimately, and maybe even the next governor will ultimately just start to progressively draw down the earnings reserve of the fund. Okay, that is like I can guarantee you that will happen. And the reason it'll happen because, like as I just said, like the $1,000 dividend thing, where the budget they passed should have been $850, right? So that was an intentional like way of creating an artificial number because of perceived political pressure. Okay, so those problems just get worse. So like the question is like, should you work toward the goal of constitutionally protecting that, and should the voters get a say? Okay, and like I just think that the voters of this state, if they had an opportunity to vote on something that they knew was still going to be a permanent fund, right, that didn't have a risk of diminishing the fund, like a high risk of diminishing the fund over time, I have faith that the voters of this state would say, you know what, we are smart enough to know by now that just like with the dividend that was never supposed to be touched, just like with, by the way, the vehicle rental tax, which is supposed to pay for tourism, that's never spent on tourism, like I give you dozens of examples. Like we know that in order for the permanent fund to be permanent, and in order for the ERA not to have ad hoc draws, we're going to have to say that we're going to protect it from appropriation from the legislature.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's I mean, this is some eye-opening stuff, especially the idea that somehow the $1,000 protects them from backlash.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, it's silly, right? Like
it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous thing. And but you and I both know that the biggest problem here is that nobody wants to make the adult hard decisions. That's the problem. And if we did now, we wouldn't have this conversation about combining the funds, because we'd fix it as it is, because it's already protected and permanent and locked away. But instead, we're going to try and do this end run around it and combine it, and then know that it'll slowly erode what we've got. It's kicking the can down the road, and it's just avoidance at this point. Everything is avoidance. All right, Will. Well, I appreciate you coming on board. Some great stuff, some hard truths. We'll keep you in mind here. Give us a couple, 3 weeks. We'll have you back on again to discuss more. Thank you for coming on board. I appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks, Michael.
All right, folks, we got to go. I got a full day today, so we will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you for coming out, and don't forget to share this show if you haven't liked it or shared it. There's 38 people watching right now on all the platforms. If everybody shared it, maybe we could get some more people in here tomorrow. All right, we got more tomorrow. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. We'll see you then.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.